Istanbul, a winter evening, oil lamps wobbling in the damp. A small procession moves along a high wall, skirts whispering, sandals tapping stone. At its center walks a teenage girl in a wool cloak, hands folded, eyes searching the dark. She's led through a gate half hidden by cypresses. The wood is studded with iron. It yawns, then swallows them all. Inside, the air changes. Warmth, jasmine, and the clean bite of lye soap. Corridors turn at right angles. Voices drop. A bell chimes somewhere, thin as a needle. They give her a basin, then a name that is not hers. Hair is combed, jewelry taken, new cloth measured against her shoulders. She doesn't speak the language yet, but she knows the meaning of the keys that flash on a belt and the bolt that slides home. Beyond these walls, the city roars with markets and minarets. Inside, schedules, rules, and silence. The door behind her doesn't lock. It thunders on third-person voice, clinical, steady. The film's compass is set to Ottoman Istanbul, roughly 1541 to 1700, when the imperial harem moved into Topkapı Palace and grew into a bureaucratic world of its own. The palace, terraces of tulips, blue tiles, gold-leaf domes, sold an image of magnificence. The Sultan prayed in public, paraded with janissaries, and dispensed justice in the audience halls. Behind the gilded lattice, a different system worked, the harem, literally the forbidden or protected quarters. In the Ottoman court, this meant a private, policed household populated by enslaved girls and women, supervised by the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, and guarded by black eunuchs who reported up a strict chain of command. Public storytellers praised charity and conquest. Court poetry imagined gardens and nightingales. Both could be true, but records suggest the harem was also an engine of dynastic security, where girls, mostly taken from the Caucasus, the Balkans, and East Africa, were purchased, renamed, trained, and deployed. Key question: what was the lived reality of those girls? Beyond paintings and rumor, what can ledgers, court rolls, and chronicles tell us about how the machine ran and what it cost? Nuance note: harem here is not a synonym for orgy. It is a legally structured household space with religious and bureaucratic rules. The Ottoman imperial harem was the most guarded version of the system. The palace gleamed in sunlight. The interior ran on shadows. Mini-cliff: the real power lay where sunlight could not go. To orient the narrative, we anchor it in named places, dates, and stable sources. Paper that survived fire, reform, and rumor. Istanbul, 1541. After a fire in the old palace, Eski Saray, the imperial harem relocates to Topkapı. This move centralizes the women's quarters within the political heart of empire and places them under the Valide Sultan's growing authority. The lexicon here is bureaucratic. Transfer orders, household rosters, privy chamber. The relocation changes corridors, but also chains of command. Istanbul, 1598. A palace expenditures ledger, Masraf Defteri, lists monthly cloth, soap, and lamp oil for ranked odalisks and their instructors. The ledger entries speak a spare language. Quantities, weights, prices. No names, just titles like novice, kalfa, usta. Forensics of paper. Sums align in neat columns. The ink darkens after each audit. We learn diets, seasons, and even the rhythm of laundry day. Istanbul, 1665. A fire rips through parts of the imperial harem, destroying rooms and prompting immediate repair orders. Court chroniclers describe the damage. Later repairs reroute corridors and reinforce doors. Losses are recorded in inventories. Bedding, chests, dowries half assembled. The chronicle tone is sober, not sensational. It enumerates what burned. Absence is the evidence. The gaps in the log after the event. The sudden spike in replacement entries. Triangulating these sources removes romance. You can see the contours of a system. Procurement, containment, maintenance. Mini-cliff, paper trails survive what voices were never allowed to say. The harem was a hierarchy. At the top stood the Valide Sultan, commanding influence and budgets. Below her were the Hazindar Ustas, mistresses of the treasury, and Kalfas, senior attendants. Farther down were odalisks, novices in training. Outside their doors moved the Kızlar Ağa, the chief black eunuch, head of the guardians, who controlled access letters and appointments, who ordered the Valide and the Kızlar Ağa, acting with or through the Sultan, who suffered the newest girls, subject to discipline, language loss, and isolation, and the seniors who failed a command. Logistics began far from Istanbul. In several regions, slave dealers sourced girls, often Circassian, Abkhaz, Georgian, or Balkan, moving them through Black Sea ports, overland caravans, or the city's slave markets. Purchase records rarely carry personal histories. Identity is stripped to price and supposed age. Architecture enforced policy. The harem sat behind a sequence of gates: the carriage gate, the courtyard of the black eunuchs, the dormitory of the novices, the hall of the Valide, the Sultan's private chambers screened by gilded lattice. Spatial design controlled sightlines. Doors could be observed without their observers being seen. Bureaucracy did the rest. Newcomers converted, received instruction, and were assigned to units. Training was a schedule: language, music, embroidery, etiquette, and movement. Rewards included better fabric, a small stipend, and for a few, proximity to power. Punishments were quiet: loss of privileges, reassignment, or a return to the old palace. Incentives aligned around money, honor, and fear. The guardians gained prestige by managing a calm household and facilitating alliances. The Valide leveraged the women's marriages to reward loyal officials. officials. The Sultan gained control over succession by controlling women's bodies within a closed system. Cause and effect. Procurement feeds training. Training feeds service. Service feeds politics. Politics feeds procurement again through dowries and patronage networks. Nuance note, eunuch is a job category in the sources. Guard, messenger, steward. The term covers people with varied backgrounds and experiences within the court. Minicliff. A household became a political machine because it could. They come in winter coats and summer dust. Some are 12, others 17. They know a few words of Turkish or none. Upon entry, they are assigned a kalfa, given a trunk, and taught where not to look. They are renamed. Sometimes a flower, Gul, rose. Sometimes a planet, Zura, Venus. The old name becomes a whisper used only in memory. The new name fits the ledger and the roll call. They learn silence first. When to bow, when to step aside, how to pass a supervisor without eye contact. They are measured for uniforms and assigned a sleeping berth in the novice's dormitory. The mattresses are thin but clean. The order is itself a message. You belong to the discipline that cleans these sheets. The first weeks are waiting for a language to make sense, for a bell to signal meals, for a glance that may change a life. Some girls notice the painted ceilings, blue and gold, and the intricate tiles. Others count the paces between the door and the courtyard over and over until the count becomes a lullaby. At night, the older novices whisper advice. Learn quickly. Never be alone in the wrong corridor. Make yourself useful. Do not be noticed until you can be. A few whisper stories about those who rose to become favorites or married powerful men. Fewer still tell the stories about those who failed. They were renamed. They were measured. They were filed. Minicliff. The first gift the palace gives is a borrowed identity. Training is choreography. Steps in, steps out. Music lessons in the afternoon. Embroidery drills at dusk. A tutor corrects posture by tapping a rod against a shoulder blade. Language class drills household terms. Needle, tray, lamp, key. The words for outside, the street, the sea arrive later, if at all. Surveillance is polite and constant. The kalfas keep lists. The eunuchs keep watch. The Valide's secretaries keep correspondences under seal. Doors never squeak because they are oiled every Friday. No one is surprised by footsteps because rugs muffle sound. Reward structures are simple. A well-made cushion earns a silver coin. A flawless recitation earns a better desk. A month of perfect attendance earns an assignment near the inner apartments. The proximity itself is currency. The closer one serves, the more visible one becomes. Failure is simple too. A missed cue means starting over. A broken dish means extra duties. Rumors of harsher penalties exist in every household. Records suggest that in this period, discipline within the palace emphasized humiliation over spectacle. Transfer back to the old palace. Loss of rank, the exhaustion of repetition. Teachers praise obedience, but they also teach poise. The system needs girls who can appear effortless while carrying trays heavy with meaning. When foreign envoys deliver gifts, the women who receive them do so with perfect calm. Inside, tremors ripple. They were choreographed. They were corrected. They were watched. Minicliff. Perfection opens doors, but every door opens onto another rule. The harem is not separate from politics. It is one of its engines. The Valide Sultan arranges marriages for senior women to officials, admirals, governors, judges. A marriage can be reward and exile at once. The dowry is generous. The new home is far from the palace. Freedom from surveillance trades places with dependence on a husband's favor. Inside, alliances form. A tutor favors her pupils. A eunuch favors his petitioners. The chief Black Eunuch's office becomes a postbox for power. Petitions in, appointments out. In 1717, Hajj Beshira will hold this post for decades, a sign of how centralized and enduring this gatekeeping becomes. Punishment is often administrative. An assignment stripped, a stipend withheld, a post denied. The sources avoid spectacle but not consequence. Venetian envoys write of women who influence appointments. Ottoman chronicles focus on order, balance, and the correctness of protocol. Both lenses reveal how the harem enforces the sultan's will through the patience of paperwork. The risk runs both ways. A woman who rises too quickly attracts enemies. A eunuch who blocks the wrong request finds himself reassigned. The palace is a maze with many exits, few of them kind. They petitioned, they bargained, they paid. Minicliff. In a house with no public court, judgment happens in whispers. Disaster clarifies power. In 1665, fire races along wooden galleries. Smoke throttles the corridors. The immediate orders are logistical. Evacuate the Valide. Secure the treasury. Count the girls. The guardians form lines with water jars. The girls cover their mouths with wet cloth. Afterwards, inventories list what survived. The lists of bedding read like obituaries for objects. Disease is quieter than fire. Fevers pass through dormitories in winter. Records suggest isolation rooms were used. Rations of broth and lemon water appear in ledgers alongside prayers noted in margins. Mortality does not dominate the sources for this period, but it interrupts them. Gaps in rosters, sudden manumissions, marriages advance to remove risk to reputation. Exit routes exist. Some women, after years of service, are manumitted and married to officials. Others return to the old palace to teach. A few remain, aging into the internal nobility of the harem. All carry the palace with them, the habits, the posture, the silence. They covered their mouths. They counted the trunks. They left in veils or stayed as shadows. Minicliff. Survival delivers freedom, but often to a life chosen by others. It begins with a sound like a sigh. A lamp tips where a curtain hangs too close. The glow is pretty, then wrong. A kalfa slaps the flame with a cloth, but embers skip like fleas. The corridor inhales smoke. The first alarm is not a shout, but a bell. 3 strikes, deliberate. Girls wake, sit, then stand in unison. The lesson of 100 drills blooming into muscle memory. They collect what the rules allow. A shawl, a small pouch, nothing else. Trunks are for later, if there is a later. The eunuchs arrive at a trot. Keys clinking, faces set. The first order is a name, Valide. 2 men pivot toward the inner apartment. A senior Hazinder counts in her head as she herds novices to the far stair. She learned this count on a quiet afternoon when the corridors were cool and empty. It flows now, 24 steps to the corner, 9 to the landing, 6 to the courtyard. Smoke pools at the ceiling, then pours down like a curtain. The novices stumble. Someone coughs, someone weeps once and is hushed. The doors of the treasury chamber open. Boxes appear, small and heavy, wrapped in leather. A human chain forms, guardian to girl to guardian. Jewels pass like river stones. Outside, the city notices. Bells answer bells. Men on the palace walls shout directions. Buckets clatter. In the harem courtyard, a kalfa organizes a water line with a voice that could lead an army. She counts as she passes. 1, 2, 3, 4, each number a prayer. She remembers a story of a previous fire told by a tutor with a scar along her wrist and hatred for oil lamps. In the Valide's chamber, the chief black eunuch bows once and offers his arm. The old woman stands. Her jewels are already gone, loaded into a chest, because a different drill was taught years ago. The body first, then the symbols of authority, then the bedding. Not because quilts matter more than girls, but because the optics of loss draw political blood. Or so the eunuch explained once kindly when there was time. The route to the garden is blocked by smoke. They take the long way. This means 2 more doors and a narrow bridge over a service alley, where heat sneaks up from below and snatches at hems. A novice refuses to move until her friend appears at the top of the stairs. A kalfa lifts the novice's chin and meets her eyes. Walk, the girl walks. Later, she will hate herself for obeying, and also for the relief of it. In the counting room, the inventory clerk has moved his desk to the courtyard. He writes by moonlight and lamplight, coughing, and when the page buckles under a drop of water, he curses and turns the sheet. He has a list of bedding and a list of girls, and he knows which list will be checked by officials in the morning and which will be checked by mothers in their hearts for years. Hours pass in a rhythm of fetch and carry, count and pass. Heat ebbs, wet ash cakes into a paste. The smell is fatty and sweet, then gone, replaced by the honesty of damp wood. Dawn is a yellow line along the Bosphorus. After, the Sultan walks through the corridors like a man touring a battlefield. He says little. He doesn't need to. Repairs will be ordered. Rooms will be rebuilt with more brick and fewer beams. New lamps will be issued, a different model. The records will show replacements for months. The clerk closes the ledger with ash-stained hands. He has a pile of numbers and a list of names with small crosses by those who coughed through the night and now sleep in the infirmary. As he dries the pages by a brazier, the ink shines like oil. The palace survived. It always does. The girls survived most of them. The system congratulates itself quietly and strengthens the hinges on the doors. The lesson will not be about flame. It will be about counting. 2 more anchors and the debates that surround them. Istanbul, 1660s. The traveler Evliya Çelebi describes slave markets near the Grand Bazaar and notes the city's appetite for Caucasian and African slaves. Though he is a court-adjacent raconteur, his Seyahatname remains a critical contemporary window into how bodies moved into households, including the palace Istanbul, 1714 Hacı Beşir Ağa Serves as chief black eunuch, controlling charitable endowments, wakf, correspondence, and personnel movements between the harem and the wider administrative world. His long tenure signals the institutionalization of the eunuch's gatekeeping role. Scholarly debate centers on agency versus coercion. Some historians emphasize the strategic roles of elite women, Hürrem Sultan, Kosum, Safiye, who maneuvered in crises, sponsored architecture, and influenced appointments. Others stress the structural fact of enslavement and the erasure of personal choice for the majority of girls who never became household names. Both views can be true at once. Individual agency operating inside a coercive system. There is also debate over how often and how early manumission occurred, and under what conditions marriages to officials served the women's interests versus the dynasties. Court rolls document manumission deeds, a zad name, and marriage contracts, but they rarely record consent in any modern sense. The archive is precise about items and payments and mute about interior lives. Note on suppression. Much confusion comes from 19th century European paintings and travelogues that eroticized the harem. That is not a conspiracy, but a distortion shaped by market demand. Museums now label many of those canvases as Orientalist, acknowledging the gap between fantasy and records. The emptiest spaces in our story are simply where the girls themselves were not allowed to write. Mini cliff. Where the paper ends, the corridors get darker. The final revelation is not a hidden scandal. It is a visible design. The imperial harem was a state technology policy. By relocating the harem to Topkapı around 1541, the dynasty placed the reproductive and diplomatic core of its household inside the seat of government. government. The Valide Sultan's elevation was policy-made architecture, the corridors that narrowed, the doors that multiplied. These were statutes in wood and stone. Profit, the system ran on money beyond salaries. Every marriage that placed a palace-trained woman with a pasha tightened a patronage knot. Every dowry was both gift and investment. The guardian's offices became toll gates of influence. Even disasters like the 1665 fire reinforced the budgetary nature of the harem. The first language of recovery was inventory, not lament. Ideology, the household model dominated early modern governance. The sultan was father, the valide mother, officials sons, and the harem girls, daughters, or more accurately, wards. The language of care masked a calculus of control. This ideology justified enclosure as protection and obedience as duty. Technology, paper, and architecture worked together. Ledgers stripped biography to numbers. Routines turned fear into predictability. The Kızlar Ağa was an operating system for access, deciding who entered, who was seen, and who left with a husband or a stipend. The machine didn't need to love or hate, it needed to function. This reframes myths of decadence. Luxury in the harem was not the point. It was the insulation around the wires. Silk softened the handrails that led girls where policy needed them to go. Music soothed the quiet hours that obedience required. None of this erases individual courage, friendship, or kindness within the walls. Those survive whenever humans share danger. But the machine's outputs are measurable. A dynasty with controlled succession. A network of provincial households staffed by palace-trained women. A bureaucracy that converts people into roles with minimal friction. Looking back from now, this matters because the language changes, but the logic persists. In several regions and industries today, systems use architecture, paperwork, and euphemism to rearrange human lives without naming the violence. The imperial harem reminds us that a gentle word for a locked door is still a locked door. Mini cliff. Once you see the machine, you start noticing its cousins. Return to the opening image. A girl crossing a threshold. Return to the opening image. A girl crossing a threshold, the bolt sliding. She learns the map of corridors, the weight of a silver coin, the relief of a schedule that tells her who to be. If she survives enough winters and avoids enough politics, she might leave with a dowry and a husband, looking back only in dreams. If she stays, she might become a kalfa with keys of her own, learning to speak in the language of inventories. The human cost is measured in lost names. Each new name erased a story that the ledgers couldn't carry. A well-run system makes suffering quiet. It turns fear into formality. History is not a courtroom, but it does force judgment on structures. The harem was efficient. It was also a machine that ate childhoods and turned them into policy. When we walk through the restored rooms today, tiles gleaming, tourists whispering, we are seeing a beautifully preserved instrument of control. Picture the bolt again. It was heavy because the door was heavy, not because anyone needed the drama of a clang. Power prefers quiet hardware. That is the most frightening truth of all. The door still looks beautiful when it's closed. Next time, we leave Istanbul for Agra and Delhi. The Mughal Zanana was a different household with similar rules. Another place where architecture and paper policed women in the name of dynasty. How did artists, poets, and queens bend that system from inside its silences?